All right, thanks, Jamie. So there is some papers getting passed around that has some tips and tricks about faba beans. If there's not enough for this group, because I don't know if I grabbed enough, there's more on the registration table where Elizabeth was sitting, taking registration. So if you don't get one, grab one from the table if you'd like one.
There's a couple pages in your book too about faba bean production put together by Alberta Agriculture. So.
All right. Well, so faba beans are we've been growing faba beans for 10 years now, and every year we seem to increase in acres, and it's been a really good crop for us because it just keeps to be more market demand and more interest. It's a crop you can plant very early. Of course, ideally you want to plant all your crops May 5th, right? But it's a plant that can tolerate those cold soils and can really survive in cold soils and thrive. So if you look at this plant compared to what's in these plots, this was planted April 20th. If I could, I would have planted April 1st. Most of my faba beans went in on frozen soils, and compared to the peas I planted on the same conditions, I planted my peas April 15th to 15th to 17th, and the faba beans started about April 20th, which is this field. You've got, I think the faba beans tolerated that cold, frozen soil and wet soil much better than my peas did, just looking at the stand and how my plant counts looked afterwards. So I'll pass this guy around. You can just take a look at it. When you look at the plots, you'll see a lot of bug biting and lygus bug damage, or sorry, pea leaf weevil damage biting these plots. So the plots look a bit eaten up, and the pea leaf weevil really likes faba beans, whereas in the Coaldale area is higher pressure, even if you do have insecticide seed treatment on them. Those ones, like that my field there, that's from the edge of the field, and you really don't see any pressure even on the edges of the field from the pea leaf weevils, and that field is south of Enchant. That's actually on dry land. I'd say half of our faba beans this year went on irrigation, half on dry land, roughly. And yeah, so in these plots here, we've got different seeding rates. With faba beans, your target plant stand is 4 plants per square foot. But of course, lots of guys want to say, oh, well, can I plant them at 3 plants per square foot, or can I go lower? And so this demo was to show how seed size can impact your plant stand, because the spectrum of seed size is quite big. This is a new variety called Snowdrop on the far side of these plots, and then this variety is the FB 9-4, and roughly double the size of the Snowdrop, this new variety. So the 9-4s are about double the size of Snowdrop. And as for plant stand, 2 plants per square foot in the first plot, and 4 plants per square foot. And that was the early seeding date, May 16th. And then the late seeding date, May 27th, would be 2 plants per square foot, and then 4 of the Snowdrops. And then the early seeding date, May the 16th, I believe it is, and 2 and then 4 plants per square foot target. And then the May 27th seeding date, 2 and 4. So ideally, you want to get them in early because they do tolerate those cold conditions.
And it is important to do 1,000 kernel weight on the faba beans. Like you said, the Snowdrops are half the size of the FB 9-4. So if you're using just a standard seeding rate, you're going to get a huge variation. So it is important to take the time to actually figure out your weight, because it can go from anywhere from 3 bushels per acre up to 5.5 bushels per acre seeding rate. So try to emphasize that it's important to do that.
When you're counting your leaves on a faba bean plant for herbicide timing, or just to see where you're at, you count them as a pair. So on this little plant here, you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, and the clam leaf. So when you're that's how you would stage your herbicide timing. I've had lots of people though this year either want to go very early because of high weed pressure early on, or their pre-emerge herbicides worked so well that they delayed, and then we had that rainy weather, and now the plants are really growing fast, and they want to know how late can they go and spray. So really the broad spectrum of when guys want to spray this crop, and it seems like you've got about a month of window from start to finish, so you do have some time to decide, when's my weed pressure worst, or am I just going to go in with something like an Assure 2 early on and then wait with something like Viper or Odyssey until the plant is bigger and more broadleaves have come. So As for pre-planting herbicides, Edge works well. Express SG is registered, although this year we're seeing some tie-up, like residue tie-up, where there's high residue. The plants are growing through there and stunting the plants. And I've seen one field that was quite impacted. I had a little bit on one of my own fields as well. But usually I'm only using that Express SG if it's going on canola stubble, because I want to hold back those volunteer canolas until then I can time my herbicides at the right time. Ideally, you want to plant faba beans on a cereal stubble because it's easy to control the volunteer cereals. Canola I've done as well. Flax you don't want to do because you can't kill that flax out of a faba bean crop, same as your peas or dry beans, same situation. If you don't know much about faba beans, they'll fix 30% more nitrogen than peas, and of course the standability is really good as well. As for target markets, the Middle East is the main export market, and targeting faba beans mainly for export. There is some domestic use, either for feed or protein sources as well. As far as herbicide residues, you will see a plot back there where they simulated Launtrell residue, and faba beans don't like Launtrell residue. And I've been told they're a little bit more sensitive to Launtrell than even peas are, if you had sprayed that the previous year. As for disease or insects at potting time, typically around that middle of July is when we see more disease pressure and also the insect pressure, like lygus bugs. Lygus bugs can cause a black spot on the seed, and that black spot can cause downgrading factor because they bite through the pod into the seed and leave a black spot. And you were saying 15% is generally when you start to get downgrading of black spots?
Usually about 15% covered with those black spots, and if you have more than that, you'll get downgraded. So the question of whether or not to control lygus bugs is kind of one of those things. We don't have an economic threshold for lygus right now on faba beans. We're working on it with Dr. Jim Roach to try to get an idea. In the past, we've done research where we've sprayed for lygus bugs repeatedly just to see if we could keep the numbers low enough. And what we found is we were able to drop the population numbers down, but not low enough to get the next higher grade. So we were able to decrease the damage, but not enough. So whether or not it's economically feasible to spray for lygus is kind of one of those things we're still kind of working on. We don't know for sure.
And I found on irrigation, you're irrigating if you're irrigating enough, because it's fairly dry at that point in the year. Your irrigation will actually push those lygus bugs out of the crop enough that even if you don't spray, you may not have an issue. So you may be sweeping and you might not find too much, or you might find the levels just very slowly rising. But it's amazing what that irrigation will do to push lygus bugs out of the crop. I was in a field where he planted his pivot corners, and yield targets, we're targeting about, if you're doing your dryland pivot corners, hoping for 40 bushels per acre there if planted nice and early. And on your pivot, 80 bushels is a target. We've been higher and lower on irrigation for field averages. But talking about lygus bugs, you're under the pivot, no lygus bug damage on the seeds. You walk 10 feet away to the pivot corner and where the water hadn't hit, and there's lygus bug damage. It all got pushed out to the pivot corners where it was dry. And so it's quite amazing what that irrigation will do to the lygus. Chocolate spot is the main concern. It's a gray mold, and Lance is registered for control of white mold, but it will also control gray mold. And so in the past I've used Lance and as well Vertisan for spraying fungicides on faba beans. And we're not waiting for a certain flower timing like you would in some crops. I've tried to spray early to try and, you try and protect the crop. You spray a little bit early at early July, or, right around July 1st time frame. And I've found that I had to go in and spray again because I went too early. It's more of a leaf disease that's causing the issue. What chocolate spot looks like is it's as if someone took a paintbrush and cleaned out brown paint and flicked it on the leaves. It's these little dark brown spots on the leaves. And they're quite small generally, 1 millimeter to 3 millimeters in size. And so typically mid-July is the time frame you want to work on that. And it's planned for general spray timing. But for myself, I wait until I start seeing that disease on the leaves, and then I go in there and spray then. And then that usually should be able to carry me until I'm not concerned about it anymore, and the crop is starting to ripen up and dry down.
Faba beans can tolerate quite a bit of chocolate spot. Under irrigation, you definitely want to spray for it. But on dry land Faba beans, it might be a question of whether you need to or not. In central Alberta, we don't necessarily recommend spraying for chocolate spot because we haven't seen an economic advantage to that. It can really tolerate quite a bit. So it's kind of one of those things, whatever you're more comfortable with, keeping in mind that sometimes it's not worth it to spray, except under irrigation. Then yes.
I think generally
you better spray under irrigation,
or at least have the fungicides in your shop so that if you have to, you're ready to spray. As for harvesting, typically what we're seeing on irrigation is swathing can be, in southern Alberta, swathing can be very good. In central Alberta, the experience is you want a straight cut, and that's the way to go. And in our area, though, it seems like we have enough heat, enough wind, that if you do get a rainstorm on something that you've swathed, it's not an issue. It dries out and you're ready to go again. I found they dry out quite fast. We had some swath that we had an inch of rain on, or maybe 3/4 of an inch, and it was amazing how fast the heat and the wind dried those things down enough that we could go back out there and start harvesting again. So it was faster than it would be for a wheat crop, probably by double in a swath. They don't blow away in the swath. They're quite heavy. There's so many pods per plant that they don't blow away in the swath. We'll treat them like canola, where we'll run the pivot at 100% at nighttime and swath that field that night, and your pods turn to rubber even if they're quite ripe. So we'll wait for the crop to be fairly ripe and almost to the point where you could say, oh, I could desiccate it, or I could swath it, or I could just leave it and let it dry down on its own. Generally the guys that would straight cut, they might have the bottom pods on their plants crack open. So you could get some loss from the pods breaking open. And so some guys that have straight cut in our area say, well, we're going to keep doing it. It wasn't too bad. Other guys said, well, I'm going to be swathing next time because I had those bottom pods break open because it was so hot. It was 35 degrees. And we just saw those pods popping and we saw seeds on the ground. Although it's a big white seed, so it's easy to see on a dark ground. It looks worse than it probably is. So,
the things about Faba beans is that they don't lodge. They stand very nice and tall and strong right through to the end of harvest. As Greg mentioned, they do kind of shrink a little bit. They won't fall over, but they will kind of get lazy. I like to call them, they kind of relax. They kind of go. They just kind of shrink down a little bit, kind of lean on their neighbor a little bit, but they don't go down. So it is really, Central Alberta especially, it's a really good option to peas. Producers are getting kind of tired of scraping the peas up off the ground, so Faba beans stand nice and tall. And also in Central Alberta, they grow really tall. Like with the amount of moisture up there in the black soils, they can be 6 feet tall sometimes. So my question always to them is, why swath them if you don't have to? We don't see the shattering on the bottom pods like they can sell in Alberta. So there's definitely options there, and they're beautiful to harvest. You can go through 4 miles an hour. I think Greg goes through his swath at 6 miles an hour. So really nice to harvest. And what you get out of the back of the combine is just dust. Very strong plant, stands nice and tall, but hollow stems that break down to just nothing. So residue issues aren't usually an issue.
And if you are going to swath, make sure it's on a slight angle, 10-degree angle to what you seeded, so that nothing drops through onto the ground, because that'll slow your combine down to 3 miles an hour if you're trying to pick up something that fell down through that stubble. And compared to pea stubble, it's amazing to seed through. It's the stubble that's left is very brittle, but it will stand there and catch a little bit of snow. But it leaves your soil so mellow, and even compared to peas, it's amazing how mellow your soil is after Faba beans in the fall. And lots of guys that would go and seed into peas might have issues with the vines dragging on their shank machine. Faba beans, there's not an issue with that. That whatever came out of the combine is just like a powder, and whatever stems are left in the soil, they're similar looking to a canola stem, but nowhere as tough as a canola stem. So you can seed through them very nicely with any kind of a drill. Oh yeah. No nitrogen. Typically you want to pick your lowest nitrogen fields. I have had people that have fertilized in the fall and then planted Faba beans there because they wanted to grow them, and they had really good results. but ideally you don't want to be applying any nitrogen, right? Phosphorus, I'm using 40 pounds of product, so 20 actual with the seed. I've gone as high as 30 actual with the seed, so 60 product. And I had someone go even higher this year and with good results, but his soil was very wet, and that, you know, you could see some injury at that rate. But they are a higher phosphorus user than peas are. So.
They don't respond to the micros at all. As far as sulfur, as long as you're not limiting in sulfur in your fields, they don't require a lot of sulfur either. So really, your biggest one is the phosphorus, and they'll get their own nitrogen.
Just because the plant is 6 feet tall and you used up all your phosphorus, it doesn't mean it.
Well, that's right. I've found, like, in my low areas where the plant is this tall, or scraping the bottom of my sprayer when I'm doing my fungicides, and the hills where they're this tall, not a yield correlation to height necessarily. So I've seen very short faba beans yield over 90 bushels per acre, no problem. Yeah. But really, I mean, it's all about how much does the seed remove, because I mean, you're chopping all that stuff and spreading it there anyways. So.
Seed supplies, can you inoculate your own seeds? Or?
Yeah, you can buy regular inoculant. Well, a faba bean specific inoculant. So yeah.
And the other question I had was the next year volunteer crop, volunteer plants. Are they paid, and would you recommend
it's not.
What to plant the next year?
I'll plant anything the next year, whether it's flax, canola, cereals. I'll plant it all. But if you really want to control your volunteer faba beans, spray a little bit of Lontrell or use something like Prestige on your cereal, and you'll smoke those faba beans. Any volunteers, but they're not a big concern. But I had some in my flax crop, so like this year I made sure I added Lontrell to my flax chemical so that I didn't have any volunteers at all.
Yeah, you can have volunteer before you seed, but not put the seed crop. That's the part.
The Lontrell will control that, no problem. So, and most herbicides do a good number on them, like. But you know how it is with volunteers. When you want them, when you want your crop, it gets hurt, and when you're trying to kill volunteers, they don't get hurt or something, right? So.
They're a pretty tough crop, but they do respond very well to herbicides. So.
Yeah. So no, I wouldn't be concerned. It's not a concern for volunteers that it's going to hurt your next crop.
You put phos on your beans?
Yes. Yeah. But I know lots of people don't, and the odd person didn't put phos with their faba beans because when we're seeding faba beans with especially the big variety, we try and use 2 tanks on the drill, and some guys are then limited on how many tanks they have. So some didn't use phos with their faba beans, which if your levels are high enough, okay, that's fine, but it's all about maintaining your levels over the 5-year rotation that you've got, right? So if you have to do it because you got to make it work, then sure, that's fine. But just remember they're using phos. So. We have a set of concaves where we have every second wire pulled. So if you've got like the nice round bar concaves, that's fine. But for us, we just had a set that we have got 2 sets. So one's got the wires pulled on them, and the other set is just the regular for cereals and flax.
What is the average height? Like, what do they grow?
I would say chest height would be an average height.
And how tall do you leave the stubble, or do you cut short to the ground? Or?
When you plant very early, they don't grow a whole lot, so your pods will pod a little closer to the ground when you plant in early April versus the guy that's going to plant in early May. So his pods will be a little higher off the ground in that May planting. But generally, I would say 8 inches of stubble. Yeah. So you will get some snow trapping, but on a year like this, my driest fields were my flax stubble and my faba bean stubble, because it just didn't trap as much snow as my heavy wheat trash did and my canola stubble. So my drier fields were my faba bean fields this spring, and it wasn't dry, but it was just perfect to get into before I could get onto my cereal fields, that's for sure. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, every year you're going to have one condition or another. I would say very similar to a wheat crop. So, and they're photosensitive, so they will start shutting down. But what would you say days to maturity are? Like, I never really have to worry too much about it.
120.
120?
120.
See, and I would even say less than that because...
Yeah, well, see, my experience is in central Alberta,
Okay.
right, where they're going to take a little bit longer. So,
Right.
yeah, probably down here more like 90,
Well,
100.
maybe 100. I would say if you can grow wheat, you can grow faba beans, has been my experience. If you can consistently grow a good wheat crop as far as the season length is concerned, I'd be fine with faba beans. I would avoid back-to-back. Just risk of disease pressure building up on that field, like especially the chocolate spots, the gray molds. And they're a host for sclerotinia as well. Like, that's not really an issue I've seen with them, but they're a host crop for it. No, you wouldn't have a whole lot of material on that soil either, so I would avoid back-to-back if you can. No, but just not that much stuff on the soil to hold your soil and in the high winds that we can get. So it depends if you're completely no-till or if you do, a vertical tillage pass, or, it depends how you are with your tillage methods or none. For grazing, they're going to help hold up your grazing crop, your barley that you're going to be planting in a blend. So they can be grazed. I've heard of people silaging them before and mixing them with their silage blend to boost the protein content of their silage blend. So I've heard of that being done. Because, they're a very high protein crop. But if you wait too long, you'll start getting these hard seeds because it depends when you're going to be silaging or grazing, because all of a sudden they'll start to ripen. But of course, they're a long season crop. So compared to the barley that you've mixed with it, they're going to be longer than that, right? So, yeah.
Where do you market your?
There's a couple different exporting companies that, some that we provide export contracts on their behalf that, it's with them, it's not with us, but we provide that. Like on this variety, Saskam Pulse Trading has rights to this variety, and they go to the Middle East, and then other varieties are open to whoever. So there's other companies like Parkland Commodities, and so there's a few different companies that export faba beans.
The big grain companies don't deal with them so much right now.
Not yet, but if acres keep growing, eventually they're going to get interested. Yeah, or some of the more medium grain companies, So.
Is it all grown on contract then?
No, it can be grown open as well. Yeah, and you can grow, like, say, the snowdrops. You could come and buy snowdrops and grow them for your neighbors as for his ration in his pig farm. So because they're high protein compared to peas. So I would say 30 to 32% protein, whereas peas might be 23% protein. So the Hutterite guys I've talked to that are feeding them instead of peas or soybean meal in their rations have said the gains on, like, their chickens and their pigs have just been phenomenal. Like, they love feeding them. So.
Faba beans have.
Yep. Like, this variety would be targeting the human consumption market. That's the main target in the Middle East.
Faba beans are a staple over there. They eat them for breakfast. They put them in falafels. It's like a major staple for them over there. Like, they love faba beans. And so right now, acreage in Alberta has exploded. We went from like 5 to 8 in 2012, 5 to 8,000 acres in 2012 to over close to 30,000. And this year, AFSC numbers are predicting about 60,000 acres of faba beans. Right now, the markets we're being told are going to hold very well. It is kind of recommended, though, to have a contract for some of them anyway.
Yeah, I mean, if you have I always like to grow stuff where I know where it's going.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, we are recommending contracts.
Yeah.
But we're being told that the markets, that's one of the questions we get asked a lot, is the market going to hold for fabas? At this point, we're being told yes, for sure. At least for the next few years, we should be okay.
Give us a approximate dollar value.
Tracking similar to peas, and I've seen it $1.50 per bushel more than peas at certain times, but tracking similar to peas.
Average yield on dry land?
I'm targeting 40 bushels. I was targeting 40, but I think I'm going to get maybe closer to 50 on my dry land this year. But I have very sandy dry land, so if you have got more of a clay dry land, you're going to do better than I will on my dry land. Jamie's cutting me off. I'm welcome. I'll talk to you guys after.
That's awesome. These guys are going to stick around, so if you have questions, feel free to make sure to ask them. We'll have a little bit of a break after the next session. You guys can go to the bathroom, grab a coffee, and catch up to these guys. And I think they might stay for lunch too today.
Yeah, we'll be here all day.
I might take off sooner, so catch me at the break here, or I'll stay for the first coffee break, and then I'll take off.
So if everyone could join me in thanking Robyne and Greg.